we don't typically stand and
No.
recite the pledge for public hearing. So I'm going to call, are you ready, Allison? All right, we're going to call the first public hearing to order at 6:34 p.m. This public hearing is open for public input on the revisions to Chapter 470 entitled Taxation. We have a presentation that Mr. Kellogg was kind enough to present, so we'll have Mr. Kellogg present the revisions, and then we'll take input from the public.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will try to quickly go through this in the spirit of time. Certainly you can go to questions after. First, I want to just acknowledge that this is a lot of the work as a result of Ms. Lapellis's subcommittee, FEPS, which Ms. Kansky is also on, and we certainly put in a tremendous amount of time, and we thank Ms. Lapellis for her leadership in this program. The background of this is we have a desire to review our existing program of tax relief for elderly and totally disabled. Our current ordinance actually states in the ordinance that the program should be reviewed every 2 years. Obviously, a desire to allow seniors and totally disabled individuals that have significant income limitations to remain in their homes and to proceed in a fiscally prudent fashion. The committee held numerous meetings since the beginning of the year. Again, a tremendous amount of research was done. We received input from the assessor, who, by the way, sends his regrets of not being present tonight. He did say we could call him on the cell if any questions arose, but he had a previous commitment. We also received input from the tax collector, the Board of Finance chair, who attended one of our meetings. The FEPS committee did a presentation and discussion and Q&A at the Senior Center, which was also attended by individuals from the Commission on Aging. We received input from the L&A committee, and then ultimately input from the town attorney. The scope of this ordinance change applies only to the Article 1, elderly or totally disabled programs. There's no changes to any other programs, such as veterans relief, etc. And it only applies to real estate taxes. And this would be effective the next fiscal year, starting July of 2017. It applies only to those, with some exceptions, primarily to those over age 65. There are some exceptions to that. You must be a Monroe taxpayer for over a year, and it must be your residence for at least 183 days per year. That's in the current ordinance. We also added in this revision that you must be current on any other taxes due to the town in order to be eligible for the program. So I'm going to briefly go through 4 different programs. One is the state program. It's actually not covered in the ordinance, but for the purpose of perspective, this is a program that exists. There's no changes to it. The eligibility and the relief are determined solely by the state of Connecticut. The town provides the credit up front, and then the state reimburses the town. This is the current state program. So as you can see, based on income ranges, married or unmarried, there's a credit that's provided based on a percentage, and there's a min and max. So for someone who earned a $23,000 income level, assuming they're married, they would be eligible for a minimum of $350, up to a maximum of, well, basically up to 40% of the taxes due, up to a maximum of $1,000. And again, this is funds that we ultimately receive back from the state. Program 2 is the town tax credit. This is an additional credit, and the relief and eligibility are determined by the ordinance within the enabling state statute parameters. This is a program that currently exists in our ordinance, and currently there are about 559 individuals on this program at a cost to the town of approximately $378,000. And again, those numbers are probably as of, I don't know, maybe 4 months ago when we last got numbers from the assessor's office. The recommendation from the FEPS committee was to maintain the current income eligibility ranges in our program, which is up to $60,000. We felt that the income ranges were in line. I know there was a question at our last council meeting about that. Area towns, just to give you some perspective, Shelton's cap is $42,900. Bethel is 48,000, but we have towns like Trumbull and Newtown that are both 70,000, and then towns like Fairfield, which are 73.5. So we felt we were kind of in a reasonably good kind of middle spot there. We also proposing increasing the credit percentage, and I'll go through the specifics on the next slide, but the total cost of those incremental credits estimated by the assessor is just over $32,000. The cap, which I'll go over, is another parameter which would increase costs. Our recommendation increase is about $2,700. So these are relatively small amounts, but you look at the overall increase in the credit, it's almost a 9.4% increase in the overall credit benefit that we're providing to those eligible. And we wanted to maintain a somewhat conservative approach on this because, as you'll see later, our focus is on the deferral, is on revamping the deferral program. So in the town credit program currently, if you take that same $23,000 income household, currently they would fall under this this bracket here. They would be eligible for a 13% credit up to a max of $1,300. We are proposing that this bracket be increased 2 percentage points to allow them to be eligible for a 15% credit, and also increase the cap. It would be or up to $1,500 max. So basically 2 percentage points and $200 increase on the cap. All the other brackets are increased 1 percentage point and $100 each on the cap. The reason that we emphasize this bracket is that looking at the data with FEPS and the Board of Finance Chair, we found that there was it was skewed, those individuals on the program were skewed towards the lower end of the bracket, so we wanted to provide greater relief for those who were in the greatest amount of need. The third program is the Town Freeze program. That is a state program that was phased out in 1979. The town program phases out under the current ordinance in 2007, and our recommendation was to allow this to continue to phase out. Most towns do not have that. Only there's a small percentage of towns that maintain any kind of a freeze program. But did want this letter included in the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kellogg. I know all the members of council are very familiar with these changes as we gave our consensus. However, as part of our charter, this hearing is required to receive input from the public. So, if there are any members of the public who wish to comment on this ordinance, Mr. Kirsch, please come forward, state your name and address for the record, please.
Steve Kirsch, 35 Applegate Lane. First point, this package that was on the table here appears to be missing a couple of pages regarding the actual text of this revision. A couple of questions. On the tax deferral, what's the impact on a yearly basis? I mean, you talk about what the impact might be, for the other ones. I'm not against it. I'm for these revisions. What I want is clarity on that point, number one, and the other thing which I brought up to the Board of Finance is I believe that our budget document should show explicitly someplace as a note or something what the total cost to the town is each year. I know that it's subtracted from the grand list so that it's in the calculation, but I think the total cost of these programs needs to be reflected in the budget document itself. I know that's something the Board of Finance has said they want to do, but I wanted to have it on the record for the council. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kirsch. Mr. Kellogg, do you have any knowledge of the rough estimate of the annual impact?
I recall having, we had a specific conversation with Mr. Manjos during one of the FEPS meetings. I was looking for my notes from that. I'd have to fire up a laptop probably to get that. I know that certainly it's obviously more than the credit program, and that's the intent. I do also, what I understand the question, and it's a good question. It also requires you to kind of predict the future, which is difficult to do.
Hypothetical, right?
So it's very hypothetical. I think we utilized some numbers based on other communities such as Stratford that had deferral programs and looked at the percentage of eligible people, and if it was the same percentage, what that would equate to. I recall numbers that, at the most were a couple $100,000, I believe. But again, I'd like to go back to my notes to be sure. But that's the number that's kind of in my head. And again, Mr. Manjos was not at all concerned at the time about the ability of the town to manage those kind of fluctuations over time. Again, knowing that ultimately the money does start to return back to the town. So again, that was kind of worst case scenario if we looked at everyone who is currently eligible, taking the entire tax rate, if they took the full 75%. Because again, people could apply and say, I want to only defer 50% of my taxes, let's say. Okay.
But the excuse me,
Sure.
Mr. Chairman, the
Please.
reality is nobody's taking it, right?
Right now, no.
No,
Yeah,
This particular program is not.
yeah. And the
Available as it's currently
history
situated.
is that they haven't taken it really, right?
well, again, the current program is,
Yeah, I'm afraid.
I think even our tax collector would categorize it as impractical in its current form. So again, our hope is to create a program that is practical and meaningful and that we will have.
Oh, so
I would hope
you
people would take
would
advantage
take
of this because I think
advantage
that, one, it's the right thing to do for seniors and totally disabled individuals who have lived in Monroe for time and we want to let them stay in their homes. And I also feel that, it's not only a benefit to those individuals, I think, it's a benefit to the town. I think we had discussed in a previous meeting that certainly every year that a senior stays in their home is another year that that home doesn't get turned over and most likely bought by someone who's going to enter, a family with children entering the school system and probably increase a cost to the town
Right.
taken in its entirety, right? So I think the program is mutually beneficial to the participants and the town, and
So you do anticipate there'll be some takers then?
I would absolutely anticipate there'd be some, and as we had discussed at one of the meetings, I'm not sure if it was when you were on, Mr. Lasky was, willing to work with the FEPS committee to make sure that we had a kind of an application process that was kind of made sense, and I know that the senior center director was also willing to send out information and kind of publicize it, so to
Spread the
speak,
word.
and make, there are other towns that have nicely, like, I know Fairfield has a nice, like, one-page document that says you can do this or this, and it's kind of laid out nice and clear, and we could kind of model after something like that or in other towns, and I think it's getting the word out that would be beneficial.
Anything else?
Just
Ms.
a thought, I would anticipate that in this kind of a situation, privacy concerns would perhaps be an issue for some people. And the fact that like some of this has to come to the council for approval, is there any
No,
concern?
in fact, and perhaps I wasn't clear, the way the ordinance is written is that the form of the agreement needs to come before council. So
Okay,
I would presume that should this pass later tonight and then subsequently get signed by the first selectman, that we'll work with Mr. Lasky, town attorney, and I'm sorry, LNA, yeah, LNA, and the tax collector to come up with a template agreement. So there'll be one standard agreement. It will not be subject to modification by anyone. That will be the agreement that the council will approve. And then literally, if someone, is approved for the deferral, it's simply a matter of plugging in the specifics of, who and names and how much. And it's basically a non-negotiable agreement at that point. So those specific agreements with names wouldn't come to us because
Okay.
we've already approved the agreement in concept.
okay, thank
So,
you.
yeah.
It's also public record,
That's true.
the assessor's
I know
card would
someone
reflect
wants
Right,
to
right.
look it up.
But it-
Exactly.
Eliminates us having to get
the scrutiny.
Right.
Any other members of the public wish to comment on this proposed ordinance? Any members of council wish to comment further? All right, seeing none, we're running a little behind. We'll close this particular public hearing. Time is 6:57 PM. We're 12 minutes into the next public hearing. So we'll call that public hearing to order for input from the public on the revisions to Chapter 291 entitled Food Handling Establishments. Again, council's been well apprised. Mr. Kellogg, if you would just give a very brief overview of these revisions, briefer than you intended?
Certainly. So this chapter, formerly called food handling establishments, it's renamed to food service establishments to be consistent with the state public health codes. It's revised in its entirety. It grants the authority to the Director of Health to enforce the provisions of the chapter. And the chapter outlines the operations of food service establishments and provides for general provisions in regards to licensing and inspection, as well as the technical standards required for the equipment and the facilities. It incorporates the state public health code where appropriate, and basically adds to that those areas of the public health code where they are silent, such as local licensing, and provides us with that authority.
Thank you, Mr. Kellogg. Any members of council wish to comment before I open up to public? All right, Ms. Kansky.
In years past, we've had health directors who have, gone ahead and like talked with people who were preparing food and actually, I don't know what's the word I'm looking for, but told them that they cannot continue because they're violating some health code. And there were times that council got involved with that, which one of the instances, I'll give an example, is up at Wolf Park when there was a vendor who was told to have 2 wash stations, I think it was, and the health department closed them down, and there was people on this board that were objecting to that. Will this give the health director absolute authority to go ahead and close down an establishment or do what they have to do because there's a violation, without council saying, why did she do it, or he do it, and so on and so forth? Does it have the teeth in it to give her or him the right to enforce this ordinance?
Mr. Kellogg, you can comment.
Happy to
Ms.
respond.
Brault is also here
Yeah.
for the record, so I'm sure she can comment as well as to how viable she believes this particular ordinance to be. Mr. Kellogg?
Let me first state that the changes to this, the revamp of this ordinance was vetted and approved by the Board of Health, of which Ms. Brault sits on unanimously by the Board of Health, as well as being vetted, approved by MMA, as well as the town attorney. I fully believe that this ordinance provides the appropriate authority to the Director of Health to enforce the public health code and the provisions of the ordinance. There are certainly areas where, it also substantively preserves the due process rights of an aggrieved business owner to appeal orders all the way up to the state if necessary, if they feel necessary. In fact, that's a requirement that they provide those, the language of how they could appeal an ordinance, appeal an order. In fact, this ordinance provides very specific authority of the director to immediately terminate an operation that they deem an imminent threat to public health, of which those items are itemized as well. So I feel it absolutely gives authority to the Director of Health.
Do her job.
To do his or her job, and I would welcome any comments from Ms. Brault in that regard.
We did talk about this in detail in the Board of Health, and basically it does give the authority to the Director of Health when there's an hazard.
I'm sorry, I can't
When
hear
there's
you.
an imminent hazard, it does give the health director the authority to close the restaurant.
Good, good. Thank you.
And I certainly want to emphasize that while it does provide that authority, I think the board was very prudent in promulgating standards that are not unreasonable. The intent is to protect the public health, but certainly not unnecessarily restricting businesses from being in business and doing what they need to do to have a viable business. So I think they struck the right balance.
Anybody else wish to participate? Any members of the public? Mr. Hostler, name and address for the record, please.
Lee Hostler, 272 Stanley Road. I'm not sure, Mr. Skansky, if I heard exactly what you said, but
I'm gonna bring something else up. Does this have any effect on mobile trucks?
Food trucks?
This is food trucks?
Mr. Kellogg?
So itinerant vendors is how they are referred to in the state health code and how they're defined here, are included as one type of food handling establishment. Itinerant food vendors are currently allowed by the state health code, and they are contemplated in here as well. And so, yes, they are fully authorized and permitted under this ordinance.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Housley. Would any other members of the public wish to comment on this ordinance? All right, seeing none, any further comments from council? All right, seeing none, I will close this public hearing at 7:04 PM. And we have 2 more to go. Moving on, I will call to order and open the 3rd public hearing this evening for public comment on the revisions to Chapter 305 entitled Health and Sanitation. Mr. Kellogg, you're on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is maybe this might be the smallest ordinance in our code. This basically is a small revision to basically continue to adopt the state public health code, but only in matters where the code of the town of Monroe is silent, and then in any matter where the code conflicts with the state statutes or regulations, being clear that the higher standard would prevail.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kellogg. Fairly self-explanatory. Any comments from council? Any comments from the public? All right. Seeing no comments from the public or council, we can effectively close this public hearing at 7:05 PM. Our next public hearing is not scheduled to start until 7:15 PM. It would be appropriate to take just a brief recess, wait till 7:15, since that's the scheduled time, so as not to preclude anybody from comment. So we'll reconvene at 7:15 for that last public hearing.